Operation Northwoods, the secret U.S. plan that almost started a war with Cuba. The United States and the Soviet Union approached the brink of nuclear war. At a distance of only 90 miles from Florida, one island rapidly became one of the most geopolitically volatile locations in the world. This island was Cuba. Following the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro aligned Cuba with the Soviet Union, establishing it as a communist ally. From the perspective of the United States government, this development was deemed unacceptable. This concern intensified following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. American leaders expressed concern about the potential spread of communism throughout Latin America. Privately, however, additional developments were unfolding. More troubling actions were being considered. Senior officials within the U.S. military proposed an operation that was considered highly controversial. Decades later, the existence of this proposal remains difficult for many to accept as fact. A scheme that incorporates simulated terrorist attacks, staged hijacking incidents, simulated funeral ceremonies. There is also the potential for harm to innocent civilians. These actions were intended to provide justification for initiating a war against Cuba. The operation was designated as follows: Operation Northwoods. In contrast to many conspiracy theories, this operation was officially declassified by the United States government. Comprehensive understanding of Operation Northwoods requires consideration of its historical context. It is essential to recognize the pervasive atmosphere of fear in the United States during the Cold War. The Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons. Communist influence was expanding globally. China had already adopted a communist government. Subsequently, Cuba also established a communist regime. For American policymakers, the presence of a Soviet-aligned Cuba in close proximity to Florida constituted a direct national security threat. The unsuccessful Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 resulted in significant embarrassment for the United States. The invasion force, trained by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was quickly defeated. Fidel Castro consolidated his political power following the failed invasion. In response, anti-communist officials in Washington, D.C. grew increasingly desperate. The United States military sought a more compelling justification for direct military intervention. However, a significant obstacle remained. The American public was unlikely to support the initiation of another war. According to declassified documents, some military officials believed that public outrage would need to be deliberately generated. Operation Northwoods was a secret proposal created by the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962. The documents outlined potential justifications for military intervention against Cuba. Several of the proposed justifications were particularly severe. According to the documents, officials discussed staging incidents that would appear to be Cuban attacks against Americans. The objective was straightforward: generate sufficient public outrage to enable the United States to invade Cuba with widespread public support. Several proposals were considered, including the following: stage hijackings, simulated attacks on military installations, bombings, acts of sabotage, manipulation of news coverage. One proposal involved orchestrating a fabricated passenger aircraft incident. Another proposal involved planning attacks in U.S. cities that could subsequently be attributed to Cuban agents. Historians often refer to such actions as false flag operations. A false flag operation is intended to create the appearance that another party is responsible for the attack. Notably, these proposals originated from high-ranking officials. These proposals were developed by some of the highest-ranking military officials in the United States government. One section of the Northwoods documents outlined plans that involved Cuban refugees. Another section considered the possibility of staging funerals for fabricated victims. The documents included discussions regarding simulated terrorist campaigns. The documents also described efforts to create a helpful wave of national indignation. The significance of this phrase is considerable. This phrase reveals the underlying objective: the manipulation of public emotion. The planners demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Fear has the capacity to alter public opinion rapidly. Anger can generate public support for military conflict. Furthermore, emotionally charged populations frequently cease to question critical issues. One proposal involved substituting an actual civilian aircraft with an unmanned drone. The unmanned drone would subsequently be destroyed through remote detonation. This action was intended to create the false impression among the public that innocent civilians had perished. Even in contemporary discourse, Many historians consider Operation Northwoods one of the most disturbing declassified government proposals in modern American history. This assessment is not due to the proposal's implementation. Rather, it is because the proposal was seriously considered at high levels of government. President Kennedy did not approve the plan. This decision holds significant historical importance. President John F. Kennedy rejected Operation Northwoods. The plan was never officially implemented. Kennedy refused to authorize the proposals. Instead, the administration pursued alternative strategies regarding Cuba. However, the fact that the proposal reached such a high level of consideration demonstrates the intensity of Cold War tensions at the time. Some historians argue that the military and intelligence establishments became increasingly aggressive following the Bay of Pigs disaster. The fear of Soviet influence often overrode rational decision-making processes. In October 1962, global tensions escalated significantly. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. For 13 days, international leaders engaged in intense negotiations. During this period, human civilization faced the imminent threat of catastrophe. Cuba emerged as the focal point of the global conflict. The ongoing relevance of Operation Northwoods. The mention of Operation Northwoods often prompts the immediate reaction. Such events could not occur in the present day. However, historical evidence demonstrates a significant pattern. Governments frequently justify extraordinary measures during periods characterized by widespread fear. This tendency is particularly evident during times of war. It also emerges during periods of intense geopolitical rivalry. Such actions are further justified when public sentiment is heightened. Operation Northwoods compels critical examination of several challenging questions. To what extent are governments willing to act during perceived national emergencies? Does fear have the capacity to override established moral principles? Is it possible for propaganda to influence the beliefs and behaviors of entire populations? Most significantly, the following question arises. To what extent is contemporary geopolitics shaped by the control of information? Operation Northwoods was not solely concerned with military strategy. It also involved the management of narrative control. This included efforts to shape public perception. It further encompassed the manipulation of public emotion. Additionally, it sought to influence public support for war. It is widely believed that the Cold War concluded several decades ago. However, diplomatic tensions between the United States and Cuba have persisted. In recent years, these tensions have intensified once more. In 2026, the United States imposed additional sanctions on Cuba and accused the Cuban government of posing a threat to the U.S. government, has also targeted Cuban organizations with military affiliations, such as GESA, which controls significant sectors of the Cuban economy. In parallel, Cuba continues to experience a severe economic crisis. The country faces persistent food shortages. Frequent electricity blackouts further exacerbate daily hardships. Significant migration waves have resulted from these conditions. Political repression remains widespread. Public frustration continues to grow. Recently, the United States also moved aggressively against former Cuban leader Raúl Castro with criminal charges connected to the 1996 plane shoot-down incident. Cuba issued a warning to the United States regarding potential violations of Cuban sovereignty. Several analysts contend that the relationship between Washington and Havana may be entering one of its most precarious periods in recent decades. This context underscores the continued relevance of Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods serves as a reminder that geopolitical conflict between the United States and Cuba has deep historical roots. These roots are associated with fear, power, ideology, military strategy, and public perception. One of the most significant lessons from Operation Northwoods is not related to military strategy. Rather, the lesson is psychological in nature. Modern conflicts are not waged solely with conventional weaponry. They are also contested through the construction and dissemination of narratives. Visual imagery plays a critical role. Media headlines shape public perception. Emotional responses are strategically elicited. During the Cold War period, governments recognized a particularly dangerous principle. By controlling public fear, it is possible to influence collective behavior. This is why propaganda has always been central to geopolitical conflict. And today, social media has amplified this power dramatically. Information spreads instantly. Emotional content spreads fastest, and populations become polarized more easily than ever before. Operation Northwoods shows how governments once consider manipulating public emotion to justify military action. That reality forces modern audiences to become more critical thinkers. Not paranoid, but aware, because throughout history, fear has often been one of the most powerful political tools ever created. The most concerning aspect of Operation Northwoods extends beyond the proposals themselves. Rather, it lies in what these proposals reveal about institutional behavior under significant pressure. When nations perceive existential threats, ethical boundaries frequently become less rigid. Institutions may rationalize the adoption of extreme measures. Officials sometimes justify hazardous decisions by invoking the concept of the greater good. This pattern has recurred throughout history. Such tendencies are not unique to the United States. Numerous governments worldwide have demonstrated comparable behavior. Historical patterns consistently reveal a recurring cycle: fear, crisis, emergency powers, narrative control, manipulation of public sentiment, then expanded government action. Operation Northwoods serves as a prominent example of how fear generated during geopolitical conflict can drive institutions toward ethically precarious actions. For many years, the existence of Operation Northwoods remained unknown to the public. Subsequently, the relevant documents were declassified. As a result, previously implausible claims became established historical facts. This development underscores the significance of declassified archives. Such archives reveal governmental decision-making processes during periods of crisis. The National Security Archive subsequently published many of these documents for public access. Historians continue to analyze these materials in contemporary scholarship. The objective is not to promote conspiracy theories. Rather, the aim is to understand the mechanisms of power that operate outside public view. This approach acknowledges that historical realities are often more complex than official public narratives suggest. Operation Northwoods was never implemented. However, the proposal was authentic. It constituted a documented military proposal. The proposal received approval from senior officials within the Pentagon. President Kennedy ultimately rejected the proposal. Furthermore, the details of Operation Northwoods remain concealed from the public for several decades. Today, as diplomatic tensions between the United States and Cuba escalate once more, the narrative acquires renewed relevance. This development underscores a persistent truth: governments are made of human beings. Moreover, individuals acting under fear may make perilous decisions. Ultimately, Operation Northwoods is not solely a narrative concerning Cuba. It is fundamentally a narrative about power, fear, and the manipulation of narrative control. The fragility of truth during periods of geopolitical conflict is evident. If this documentary has revealed unexpected information, consider sharing it with individuals interested in hidden history, geopolitics, intelligence operations, and the systems that influence global events. Additionally, subscribing to the Secret Narrative YouTube channel provides access to further documentaries on secret operations, power structures, hidden history, psychological warfare, and untold stories previously concealed by governments.